Peter, good to see you.
Well, not yet. I'm not.
Okay,
There you go. Now you can see me.
now it's good to see you. All right. Beth, are we gonna do a Canvas? Do you have a link to that?
Hold on, yeah.
I'm gonna try to clean up the notes. Hi, CJ. We're just kind of getting started. I'm gonna try to see if Tiffany, will you help me once you're done eating your lunch? No pressure. Will you help me kind of note take?
Yeah.
Thank you. But you should definitely eat your lunch first.
I can multitask.
Just draw attention to the fact she's chewing. Come on. I mean,
I used to work in restaurants. Come on.
Just give Tiffany a break here, would you?
I'm going to have to edit out so much of this video, let me tell you.
At least she's eating with her, mouth closed.
Oh, okay.
So that's the beauty of having a big mustache, is I can eat with my mouth open. Nobody will know it.
Oh my gosh, these are the mad skills. Do Tiffany, do you or Beth have a question that you'd like to start off with? Hi, Christine.
Hi, Christine.
Happy Monday, y'all.
CJ.
I'm slowly cleaning up the agenda a little bit. And poor Michael, he's like definitely lost out there in he's not signing on for some reason. Okay.
How about what was the best part of your weekend?
Oh, that's a good check-in question. All right. So here is our link to the agenda, and is that the popcorn question, Beth?
Sure.
Okay. Would you want to call on somebody?
I will call on CJ since he's very quiet so far.
CJ is planning on getting here 20 minutes late to avoid the popcorn questions. Now, did I miss the question? I came in late, I guess.
Tell us about what was best about your weekend.
Oh, gosh, in the past 6 months, I don't know if I distinguish between weekends and weekdays anymore. But best part about my weekend was that in Phoenix, it was under 92 degrees the entire weekend. So I got to spend a lot more time outdoors before it goes back up to 110 or 115.
Awesome.
Hey, TJ, you got to call on somebody.
Oh, I'm sorry. Beth.
The best part of my weekend was I finished decorating my yard. And I will go with Christine.
You finished your yard, now you can enjoy it.
Yeah.
The best part of my weekend is my dad's birthday yesterday. So I made him a cheesecake to celebrate. And so it's just a fun time to always, bake things and celebrate and eat it. I'll tag team Miss Dia.
Thank you, Christine. I participated in a BLM protest on Friday, and it was very powerful. And in a small town like Ada, it went very peaceful and powerful. So that was my highlight. I don't know who else has gone so far, but Tiffany, have you gone?
I have not. The best part of my weekend was my husband spontaneously decided to clean all the baseboards in my house, and that was a miracle from God. So I've been very happy all weekend. And Hassan, what was the best part of your weekend?
Oh, on the cleaning theme, I actually overdue to clean the inside of my car, and I did that, and I was rewarded with finding $100 seat.
Nice.
I guess
Just to
it's you,
clarify.
Chris. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, just to clarify, it's not somebody gave me $100. It was just must have fallen out of my pocket.
And Son, we've got Chris. Let's see, we've got Peter and me, I guess, and Michael Meeks. Hassan. Oh, Michael says no meeting, no microphone for me. Oh, he's in a board meeting. Okay, so Michael is hiking in Boulder was a highlight, and he's now faking being in a board meeting. Thanks for joining us, Michael.
I'm sorry, did you call on me?
No,
Oh.
you already went. So Peter, we'll go to you, and then I'll wrap up and go from there.
It's been a pretty brutal weekend. So actually, the best part of it is I made it to today. And Celia, you go, and then I think Alistair will have to be asked in a minute.
That sounds great. So Alistair, just to get you prepared, the question is, what was the best part of your weekend? And I will go ahead and answer and give you time to think about it. No, that it was the best part of my weekend, but it was definitely a highlight. I got a text from Victor Huang. We'd been talking about his right to start stuff. And he texted me a picture, which I'll post sometime, and it's a business card. It's the back of a business card. And on the back of the business card, it says, "Thank you. I want to be an ecosystem builder supporter. Please let me know how I can help." And he said, "I found this going through some old files today. Happy Saturday." And it's basically what I wrote to him at the end of the first ESHIP summit. And because I'm a pushy broad from New York, so I handed him the card and said, I raised my hand, I'm in. So it was kind of a cool thing. So we're going to go to Alistair, and then it's good to have a couple of other people join us. So Richard and Amy, the question, just so you're prepared, is what was the best part of your weekend? So Alistair goes.
Well, now you explained that you're pushy broad from New York. That makes a lot of things clear to me. Thank you for that. Best thing in my weekend, that here in Washington, D.C., the demonstrations continued peacefully, as they have been, except for a little problem with the president on the first day. So that was the best news for me. And who do I go to? You'll have to pick the next person.
Oh, Richard or Amy. Richard, your mic's off, so tag.
Okay, then, well, Richard, yes.
Hey, my mic's off. On?
Your mute's off, sorry.
Okay. This weekend was crazy, amazing. We had a protest demonstration in Troy, New York, 11,000 people. And in the 48 hours beforehand, I was like, hey, what can I do as a startup, as a tech, as a person with connections to the startup community and ecosystem around the world? And we pulled together resources from top companies and YC funded startups. Everyone dropped everything to put together. We kind of ad hoc Palantir this weekend, and we deployed a system that was like an Overwatch and invisible safety net for the protesters. And we had a field producer who produces for international networks like CNN, NBC, and Fox and all of that. As a freelancer, he came up and led a field team, and he produced like Ferguson and Milwaukee and Baltimore when they were really, really bad a couple of years ago. And he came up, led a field team, and we had eyes and ears in the protest and on like roofs and buildings, and had more eyes and ears than the police, streamed directly to the organizers so that we could see more than what the police were able to see, and we were able to give them a VPN to use for all the organizers, a separate server for all 11,000 protesters, and we were ready to deploy an app that allowed everyone to communicate without Wi-Fi or LTE if they jammed the signals. But everything was super peaceful, super amazing. We were just ready, standing by in case something turned violent. And it was protesters against police. We were able to out technology the police, but thankfully everything went great. 11,000 people. If you look it up, everything was peaceful, and everyone was like, "This was amazing." So I'm glad we were able to provide that support. I'm gonna, Amy, it sounds like, is the last person.
Wow, that's really, all of this is powerful. I'm gonna, what was the question again? Is it sort of like, I was gonna take us in another direction, but then I don't think I want to. Can you just give me the quick prompt again and I'll make it like this?
Tell us about the best part of your weekend.
Best part of my weekend. Best part. Okay. I think I'll yeah, I will take it in another direction. I had in the midst of all of this, I did. Me? Let me try one more time. Yeah. I had some time with.
Beth, maybe try muting.
I'm in Google, so hold on.
Okay, looks like Amy's back on mute, but she had some time with her family that she hadn't been able to do in a while. So I think that's a wonderful note to move on to. But thank you so much. Okay, everybody get a chance to go, right? And I know CJ likes to avoid this part, but really this is the community building part of the whole idea of community. So thanks for bearing with us, CJ, and sharing some of this. So we'll talk about universal support, and Beth has put in a link. I think, is it accessible now to the project canvas? Maybe. So if you'll put in the link again, that would be great. So the conversations that have happened in the past couple of months have really brought us to the point that we're talking about ecosystem building in a world that all is talking about ecosystem building, but maybe not in quite the same way. And this is a great opportunity to talk about some messaging points and some common areas. So Beth, did you put the link back in so that they could see the canvas? So it's shareable. In the meantime, I will remind everybody that the ESHIP Summit is taking place on the 15th and 16th of September. And this time is an interesting point in time because we'll actually, being that it's all virtual, we'll probably have a wider audience than has ever happened before. And it's an incredible opportunity to talk to people about ecosystem building in a way that makes it more about a PSA, right? It's more of a universal support. And I want you all to think about, as we send out a call for presentations, also think about what is it that you want to tell the world about ecosystem building? Like, what do you want the world to know about this thing called ecosystem building? And so, so if you'll ponder that and think about what you'd like to present. And are we able to see that link now, Beth? Do you have a shareable link?
She's saying it's not loading, so maybe we can talk through it, or you can throw up a blank canvas.
Okay, we could probably throw a blank canvas. Why don't you, Beth, why don't you talk about that a little bit more? The one other thing that I want to mention before I forget is on Thursday afternoon, in lieu of a community hour that we had been hosting, primarily around the community on the ESHIP Facebook page, is we want to offer up an opportunity to create space, especially in light of the unrest and the chaos and all the movements that are going on around Black Lives Matter. So we will be hosting a community call at 4 o'clock Central Time. And there'll be a couple of people from the community that will be speaking about what's going on and sharing on how we can be good allies. And we'll be having an opportunity just to get together as a community to share some time together and kind of talk through this, because I know that sometimes it's really hard to talk to people in your community or in your families about these issues, and so we wanted to offer up that time and space. So look for it on the Facebook page, and we'll look forward to seeing you then. And there'll be an email that goes out. Beth, the show is yours. We will go behind the scenes and create a blank canvas to start with.
Awesome. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Beth.
Okay. I'm having a little bit of technical difficulty. Maybe I'll need to switch to my hotspot. But for now, just yell when something crazy is happening. So the 6.1 template, the actual request to create messaging templates that will enable us to be more articulate and aligned with the messaging that's required to gain universal support, as well as sustainability. And honestly, it's going to help achieve every single goal that we have, I believe, and including storytelling. Now my computer is not showing the draft. Have you been able to find a blank canvas? Anyone? Sorry.
Looks like
Yeah,
Cecilia's
I'm working on it.
Yeah.
I will get it ready in just a minute. So why don't you tell about what 6.1 is for those of us who don't all have it memorized?
Right. So it's making the case. Messaging, and the word template, I'm not quite sure is the right word, but messaging templates in helping us to make the case for entrepreneurial ecosystem building and why it's important. Has anyone taken a stab at drafting a canvas maybe that just we haven't seen yet for 6.1? I'll take that as a no. So along with all of the other goals, 6.1 is the messaging template, 6.2 is the global awareness campaign, 6.3 I believe is the need for a policy playbook, 6.4 I don't recall, and then 6.5 is the foundations, gaining foundation support. So I don't know, can we have some feedback as far as the priority order of those actions and how we feel about seriously attacking this particular initiative to support the others? Hassan, what do you think?
I don't know what Hassan thinks, but if we can click on that canvas, and then what I can do is I can share my screen so that you can see the project canvas template. And so
Cecilia, can you unmute Hassan? It sounds like he's stuck on mute, it says. Sometimes it helps when the hosts can unmute.
I'm trying. He's not unmuting. I can't. Oh, there you go, Hassan.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Sorry, I just need a minute to. We can just move on. I just need a minute to read this. I was focused on getting. We can just move on. I just need a minute to read.
Yeah, could I ask a question while we're waiting for Hassan? The question is, who do you see as the recipient of these messages? That is, who is the message for?
I think that's a great place to start. So maybe it would be helpful to let me see, I'm on the wrong one. So under some of the notes, to think about the audience for this message, right? So 6.1 is about messaging for universal support. So in looking at that, maybe what we can do before we even look at the canvas is to, Beth, I'm going to mute you because I've got a lot of ambient noise. So maybe talk about some of the people that that this message would be relevant to, and we'll talk about that before we even look at a canvas. So Alistair, who do you think would be an ideal audience, or knowing that the audience that is coming up to be the audience for this?
Well, I think kind of difficult to say, but it's a question of needs. Probably we should, just one suggestion is, can we find out what some of the needs are for potential audiences, whether the ecosystem builders or maybe businesses within an ecosystem, which is being built or being supported or is growing or has problems, and get whatever messages we want to those who actually has the needs. So I kind of, first decide what are our customers here based on customer need. If that, that's not terribly eloquent, but if that makes some sense. Maybe, for example, if we take ecosystem builders, we know, I think, between all of us, something about what key needs are of ecosystem builders. And people like Tiffany, for example, can say more about that than I can. And then see how a template can address that particular need.
Okay, that's a good point. So Tiffany, as an ecosystem builder working with the entrepreneurial community, what are things that you see that are lacking or challenging?
Well, I think my experience as an ecosystem builder, sometimes I feel stuck in the middle between entrepreneurs and traditional economic development organizations, professionals, roles. And so I feel like I am frequently sort of explaining and justifying, what my work is and how it's different from, a city, a municipality or a chamber. And also sort of explaining to the entrepreneur, at least with my organization, that we are here to help and support them without any expectation on a membership or sales or any sort of user agreement down the road. And so what was the question? The original, like,
I think we've refined it to is before we try to figure out who the message is for, trying to address the needs of the message. Like, what does the message need to do?
Well, and I guess thinking on the agenda, like, are we talking about the message just the general message to the audience that we're defining right now, or are we talking about the summit?
I think it's up to all of you.
Oh, okay. Because I feel like that's a different message, you know, into a different audience. If we're talking about sort of explaining, you know, the one path of what ecosystem is, why it's important, how we help, and who we help, but then also what the summit is and how ecosystem builders can benefit from going to the summit and why the summit exists, in the invitation. Yeah, what is Christine?
So let me lower your hand, CJ, for a minute, while Hassan and Beth are, I think Beth is trying to look for better Wi-Fi. I'm going to lower your hand for a second, but maybe ask this group. So by a show of hands, which one do you want to solve for? Do you want to solve for a general messaging for ecosystem building as a thing, right? Common messaging for ecosystem builder in general, or do you want to hone in and specify that you want to create a template addressing why ecosystem building thing? Okay, Christine, we're going to do your option C that you have to explain what option C is. So is it for the general public? Is it for ecosystem building summit, like the ESHIP summit? Or, go ahead, Christine.
Oh, wait.
Yeah, option C, CJ, like it's both, because especially the summit group is going to be opening to a wider audience. Can it be applicable to both the summit, that we can use it there, and it could also be applicable when we also are talking to a wider audience and a wider group of people outside of the summit itself.
Okay.
I totally agree with that, because the messaging tools or templates that are under this goal is all about building universal support, right? So if we can focus on outside of ESHIP building, but be prepared to share and get feedback at the summit, that'd be awesome.
Okay, can I raise my hand again? What I had to say was a little relevant. I think it's a little bit like a Russian doll, if you will, where there are different kinds of ecosystems. So there's two. One is for the summit, but let me talk about ecosystem building. I find that we have different types of ecosystems, and there's a choice of priorities for each one. Some of them are economic outcomes, some of them are social, some of them are strictly to support the community, et cetera. And each one has a different set of priorities, if you had to rank them. And how an ecosystem builder approaches it, depending on the priorities, is going to be different messaging, different tools. And then when you go up a level from community to region to state, et cetera, the tools and messaging are going to be different. And then when you get to the biggest level, which is for all ecosystem builders for the messaging, that's an Uber messaging. But I don't know if you can come up with that big messaging unless we talk a little bit about the different goals for different communities. There may only be 5 different ones, but it depends on how you mix them, how you prioritize them. But the messaging might be different for each one, and how we put them all together to explain them to the ecosystem building community will be relevant based on that. Because if we develop messaging that's all about, I don't know, inclusiveness, but there are communities out there where that's priority 3, then it's not going to resonate if it's just one messaging. That makes sense?
I'm going to challenge that in a minute, but I know Scott shared, I haven't gotten a chance to dive deep in a lot of the things that you shared over the past couple of days with me, Scott, but there's some eloquent things around linkage and connections that you shared. And I'm curious to hear what you think.
Thanks, Cecilia. I'm observing on this one because I don't know this group as well as some of the other ones, but I will share 2 suggestions. One is communication normally works best if you know the problem you're solving and the audience you're addressing. So far, I think we're talking about the product we're offering, not the problem we're solving. So that's why the Russian doll thing makes lots of sense is depending on the lens you have on, state, local, individual, there's multiple. In one ESHIP group I was participating in, the discussion of importance was we need to make other people understand. I'm using those words specifically, so we can win money. That's why the universal support was important. It wasn't about solving problems right away. It was, we want to be viewed as valuable, as ecosystem people. We're doing something special nobody else fully understands. We need to tell them what we do. So the challenge that I was trying to put out there is, this is a Simon Sinek thing. If you get the why right, the how and the what follow. And the why of we should be doing ecosystems is what's often called civic entrepreneurship. The problem, though, is if somebody doesn't want to pay for it or doesn't value it, it's just something we want to give. So we need to be careful as to who's asking for it. And normally they have something else in mind. So the biggest second point I would make is we need to identify what we're like. So if we're like clustering, but we do ABC, then other people who are involved in ecosystems can go, I get it. We're like economic development, but we do something different. That's cool. If we're data analysts for regions and we do it on a micro level, so we're like Harry Dent, but we do it different, then other people have a hook to grab onto. So I'm with both, that we need to address universal, but both the ESHIP Summit and other, but more importantly, I think we need to get clarity on the problem we're solving before we communicate to anybody. Sorry for the long-winded speech.
Yeah, I love that. That's great.
I wanted to
Amy.
check. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead, Christine.
I just want to chime into what Scott's mentioning, because I think a lot of what we can do is already done for us. Like there are a lot of roles that many of us see that complement the role of the ecosystem builder, and whatever we can do to help build upon what's already existing that people already have an understanding of conceptually around traditional economic development, innovation, accelerator incubators. We can have a matrix of all these things showing what the role of the ecosystem builder does and what their function of ecosystem building is, that complements those things and also fills the gaps of those things. And so I really appreciate the approach both for the messaging and then also something I proposed for the job description, because I think instead of trying to like continuously talk about something that's ambiguous that none of us can really orient towards, to be really specific and tangible as to what we already know exists, and then being able to also point to what the gaps are that we're solving for. But yeah, Amy, I see you nodding your head if you want to chime in and share some of your thoughts too.
Mostly just a +1. The comments in the that I made in the chat are, sort of, I don't know, simple W questions that I rely on a lot. If you write grant proposals, you know that you got to answer those questions too. But it's a way of, it's a I don't know, almost like a canvas or a template for just organizing. What are we doing? Who are we doing it with? Who, in my case, I think about who are we shifting power with? What difference will it make? And then that call to action. I'm really was struck by what Scott was saying, and just +1 to that, and also that additional piece that I don't normally ask, but who or what are we? It's that sort of sense of identity, and his trick, like somebody pitching a movie script, it's like this, but it's not like that, it's like this plus that makes another thing or whatever, I think is really practical and makes it easy for people to grab onto. So
yeah, it's totally relatable that way, because what you're drawing are the parallels for people to understand. When I created a food concept that I didn't launch, I would explain to people it's like what Subway did for sandwiches and Chipotle did for Mexican food. I'm just doing it with an Asian style noodle bowl. I don't have to explain the process of how things are served or how they're created, because people have an understanding with something else and there's a relatedness. So CJ, while I appreciate the point of, I think that's some of the challenges. We try to be all things to all people, or relatable things to people to justify our existence. And so it's not about inclusion, but inclusion needs to be baked into everything. So it's not about storytelling, because storytelling is baked into all of this. But if we tell them we're focusing on this because that's what's important to your ecosystem, we're losing the whole what, which is the connectedness. So the idea of doing a popcorn question is not about the fact that we get to know more about what somebody did in their weekend. We don't usually ask questions about what people do. It's about who they are, right? So we take a more personal approach, because the relationship building that's done on these calls are a way that we can go forward together, because the role that you play currently may not be your role forever. I know my role's changed a couple of times since the start of these calls. So the relationship that I have with Tiffany or Peter still remains the same, and we build on that, right? And so as we get to know each other, it's the community and building, it's the interdependency. That's what ecosystem building is to me. It's the interdependency of a community. And if we can do it better, if we can do it more robustly, then we can do those other things, because the job of the ecosystem builder is to be that invisible glue that brings the community together, so that the people can actualize on whatever it is that they do well, so that they can address the challenges of their respective communities, no matter what it is, whether it's COVID or the response to racism or all of that. It's the community togetherness that actually creates the strength. It's not the what problem are they solving. So that's where my focus is.
Are you responding to something I said? Because I feel like I just got mansplained for something that I didn't say or do. I was talking about messaging for different levels of communities that have different priorities. They're all, top priority, but certain communities have different priorities of what they're trying to achieve. And as we put that Russian doll up, the biggest one is for the entire ecosystem effort here. But there's different spins on the messaging. You can't be all things to every community. There's just different spins, if you will, different messaging styles for each one. And if you want to come up with one, that's fine. But I have a feeling that when other ecosystems are going to be using it, they may not relate to it in the same way.
So if it sounded like, first of all, I don't think I'm physically able to mansplain, but, and I promised my son I would never use that comment, but it was not a criticism or addressing that. It was incorporating some of the things that you said about being all things to all people. I think the all things that we actually are more about connectedness than addressing specific issues. So that's what I was trying to illustrate.
All right, I'll leave it at that.
Can I throw in a thought? I think one of the frustrations that I've had over the several summits and so forth is that there's always been this, to me, there's been a tendency to be all things to all people. And I know that that's not the intent, and I know that that's not where people have really wanted it to be on this. And I think part of this is not so much that there should be a single core message, but I do think that there needs to be some internal consistency across the messages. And And I think that that's a little bit what we're struggling with here, is what's that internal consistency that we're going to find that goes across the messages. And just something that you said, Celia, that struck me, because I think you said, and I'm not, this is not a criticism, so please take it that way. Don't take it that way. But in one way, you were sort of talking about the ecosystem builder in a personalized approach. And then in another way, you're talking about the ecosystem builder as sort of a system. And we keep going back and forth on that. And those aren't mutually inconsistent with each other, but they send very different messages. Because one focuses on who is that person as opposed to what is that environment. And I think if we can get some consistency there in terms of sort of the logic of model on this, then I think then the other messages sort of start to spill out of that. Now that's just, I mean, maybe, and again, I'm not trying to pick on something you said, but it has happened in a lot of other conversations by a lot of other people, me included, about how this thing gets described. And I think that's where our struggle is right now, at least in my mind.
I think you're absolutely spot on. Yes.
If I pose a metaphor building on Peter's comment that's music related, we don't play the same instruments, but we need to harmonize and decide what type of music we're going to play, whether it's jazz or classical or blues. And in a sense, we need to be ecosystem conductors, though that has a loaded language in it. So I think most of the group has drifted to the phrase architects because it's more neutral than conductor, which is a controlling aspect. But there is an individual on the call, I believe, where he was, Dr. Brett, who is a systems thinking dude. And he looks at this kind of like a physicist and tries to figure out how the gears and the neutrinos and the silly string fit together so that the rest of us can use Play-Doh machines and put it together properly. And in one way, we're trying to create physics for ecosystems and help the ecosystem evolve naturally rather than run into mistakes and errors that other things have done, whether it's climate change or, you know, watch out, we're going to have an earthquake here if you don't put in some of these things to protect yourselves, or a flood. The ecosystem insights that I think this group brings is two levels. One is negative prevention. We have ways of helping people avoid accidents. That's one side of the whole equation that we tend to drift into, is how do we protect our communities from doing something stupid? There's another side that says, you know, if you did this, you could potentially produce some real income for your community and lift a whole bunch of the problems from the left side of the balance sheet to the right, make them assets, if you did these. But there are two different aspects of what an ecosystem architect does and what our messaging does. But the core of it kind of comes from Alistair's, in my humble view, is if you know how the pieces interact, it's not about opinion, it's about science.
I really like the metaphor in terms for the music side. I think there may be, and I don't want to quibble on this, but there may be another example that sort of runs in my mind, and that is, so I play the oud, and one of the things that we learn are maqams, and we also learn the sort of the how a taksim, which is an improvisation that occurs during the course of a musical piece, and how that plays out. And what, first of all, maqams are not scales; they're conventions, so there's a lot of fluidity, and within a given piece, people will be shifting from one maqam to another, and using taksims or these improvisations as the transitions on those things. Now, everybody in the group, unless I'm playing, knows where they are in this sort of thing, and then I'm trying to catch up. But with the others, they're all sort of know where they are, and there is no conductor. I mean, it is a sort of a spontaneous, and I kind of think that that's Scott, if you don't mind, as sort of an amendment on what you were saying. I think that's more of the way in which I think this may make some sense. So there are conventions. It's interesting to hear somebody describe a maqam, because you'll say, well, this is what you're supposed to do, unless you decide to do this, and then you can go in this direction, unless you decide that. But everybody seems to be working together when this happens, and it's sort of more innate. And I think that's kind of where I think we're heading with this.
Peter, to play on that further, ecosystem architects typically stand in when they're not playing together well.
I don't know where this gets you, Celia, but anyway, we're off on some tangent, but maybe you can pull this together.
I think this is actually where we need to figure, because otherwise it's a lot of sense making. Beth, where are you landing on some of this as we discuss? I think you and Hassan really led some of this universal support discussion, and Dia, who's quiet right now, but I'm curious to hear what does that make you think of, or what do you think the direction should be then? And how do we start?
I can't help but think about kind of the elephant in the room, right? So our goal as ecosystem builders or architects is to work across the ecosystem and convene and connect with high levels of trust, all in the interest of building our communities to be much more economically, have much more economic health, right? The elephant in the room for me is that I have not come across any community that doesn't have the detractors and the ego builders. So the messaging, and I would say the messaging is most important at a granular level to the economic developers that are working focused on the traditional approach. So the messaging, when we did the awareness campaign here in my community, the message was pretty clear and hard hitting across the board. And we went towards educating everybody, including the economic development folks. And the messages were well received and the culture has shifted, but the economic development players still have their silos and misplaced competition. So unless you have really strong community leaders that believe in this with very strong backbones, the economic development players, at least here, aren't going to play consistently. So if we get the message and prioritize it to the community leaders that can actually, or funders that can actually influence the economic development communities to play, whether it's a carrot or a stick or both, we're not going to get there.
Let me jump in with something on that. I have to be careful because I have to not divulge confidentialities. A good friend of mine is in my age group, and he's in his 60s. He's prominent within the economic development world. He's African American. And yesterday we had a brief conversation, and we're following up today and tomorrow and the next. And when I said this was a brutal weekend, this is part of why it was a brutal weekend. And he shared with me a conversation he had with his colleagues, also African American, who were primarily in the 30s and 40s, and one in his 50s. My colleague and I, my friend and I, both, like I said, are in our 60s. We remember what went on in '68 with the civil rights unrest. And clearly the differences are the same and starkly different. I mean, they're just, they're not the same, but it is an anchor point. And what he was describing for me, and again, I haven't gotten into the details on this, was for his colleagues, his younger colleagues, these demonstrations in the economic development world has presented a real existential dislocation for them. Because as it was expressed to me, everything they've been working for has suddenly changed. And so, I'm not suggesting that ESHIP and ecosystem building is, quote, the answer, but I do think that there's going to be a reordering. I don't think this is passing. I think this is fundamental. And I think that as part of that reordering, where entrepreneurship and other sorts of activities in the economic development sphere are going to get a real serious reexamination. I'm trying to deal with this now in our project that we're calling The Day After. It's trying to sort of catch up with a raging bull right now, but it's one that I think, it really hit me yesterday, and that this is really shaking the foundation for at least an important cohort of people within the economic development community. And I suspect it's going to go well beyond simply African Americans who work in the field. So I don't know where that takes us, but I think we have to be cognizant of that elephant in the room right now too.
Richard, did you want to share something?
He looks really happy.
He does. He does. I'm so sad that Mike's like faking his faculty meeting, and he's got some really amazing points in here in the chat. But I'll definitely take the chat notes and link them to the agenda.
Cecilia, I think what Peter said is an opportunity for ecosystem builders, because ecosystems now will be even more important than before if people are kind of floating, not knowing really what to do. I think there's a great opportunity for the ecosystem builder message to get out there, because traditional economic development, as Peter noted, may never be the same. People talk about the new normal. A colleague of mine has used the phrase never normal, which may in fact be the future for quite a long time. So take advantage of that. I apologize for noting this, because I know you're tired of hearing me rabbit on about complexity and complex systems, but I would point out that the demonstrations have several features of complex system, starting with an isolated event, tragic event, but an isolated one, which has had huge consequences. That's one. Second, self-organization, that the demonstrations largely have had no single leadership. They've self-organized around the country and the world. And the third feature is emergence from that self-organization of new ideas, new thinking, new ways of doing things, which will continue for some time. So it is a perfect, I would say, example of what is a nonlinear or a or a complex system.
I think that's vitally important to keep hearing you say that, Alistair. Do not discount that. Hassan, did you want to add something as we get close to wrapping up? Or anyone else?
Alistair, can your tools do sims for a better normal?
Can I do what?
Sims, simulate a better ecosystem for a better normal. In other words, normal is all relative, right? So if we define the normals in the agents, can we re-engineer the ecosystems with your tools?
Well, not with my tools necessarily, but simulation of systems like this has been studied for decades by some really, really smart people. And it is extremely difficult because traditional neoclassical economics, standard economics 101, everything in equilibrium, can be simulated. It can be, there's mathematics to it. When we go into complex systems, there is no mathematics, doesn't exist. So simulation is very difficult, can be done, makes a lot of, puts a lot of constraints and conditions, a lot of assumptions on it, which may then destroy the whole thing. So a quick answer is yes, you can do some simulation. And that's another opportunity in this new normal world. But it's very difficult, takes a lot of effort and money.
Well, I know this group has a lot of effort behind it. I don't know about money, but it'll be interesting. And I know that sometimes the hope is that we land on something and we move forward. I think taking the time to sense make and move slow to move fast is really important too. And there's a lot of really important points that came out of this discussion.
Celia, just a quick note, I forgot to mention, anyone who's interested more in simulation work, it's pretty much all being done at the Santa Fe Institute in New Mexico, which has people like Nobel Prize winners there working on this topic.
Great. Will you share if there's anything that they can link to, like in a Slack or in the chat, so that that people can follow up on that too? That would be great. Beth, Hassan, Tiffany, anything you want to share and add as we wrap?
I just want to personally thank everyone. There's a lot more to think about. You know, I'm one of those people that really just wants to dig in and get the draft done and get the feedback and move forward. So just all of these different scenarios and thoughts about our future has me understanding that we need to think a lot deeper than originally thought around this. So I appreciate it. We do have a call coming up to talk about the Canvas. I think it's sometime next week. If you're interested, let me know. I can give you the specifics. I did send out a doodle poll to people that I knew were interested. So happy to include more. Thank you.
Okay. So we're coming up on the top of the hour, and yes, so ESHIP Summit, September 15th and 16th, virtually. And we will, there is going to be a call for presentations coming out in the next little bit. There's a lot of things that many of you have spoken about here that I would love to see presented and shared with a wider audience. And as we mentioned, you know, the idea of a virtual conference opens up the opportunity to something bigger and wider. So while it seems really wonky to say, taking advantage of an opportunity, but this is that crisis creates opportunity, and so we'll be able to do a little bit more in a big wide scope and invite people to maybe peek into our world a little bit. Let's maybe make it so that they're not drinking out of a fire hose. That would probably be helpful to them. Bite-sized chunks of all the wonderful wisdom, because I know it takes a lot of time to get up to this, right? Understanding. Again, Thursday, and we'll post it on the Facebook page. I'll send out Christina and I will send out an email to all of you and anyone in the Slack channel to come together in a time of solidarity and support each other while we go on trying to move the ball forward. So we appreciate your time and your energy and your leadership and all those wonderful things. Keep sharing, keep supporting each other, and have a wonderful rest of your week. Talk to you soon.
Have a good one, everyone.
Bye.